Russian President Vladimir Putin has sounded one of his starkest warnings in years. Addressing the permanent members of Russia's Security Council, he declared that the world is now standing on the edge of a nuclear arms race as the last surviving U.S. Russia Arms Control Pact, the New START Treaty, approaches its expiration on February 5, 2026.
Russia is prepared after February 5, 2026 to continue for 1 year to adhere to the central quantitative limits under the START Treaty. But let me stress, this measure will only be viable if the United States acts in the same way and does not take steps that undermine or disrupt the existing balance of deterrence capabilities.
Putin announced that Moscow is willing to voluntarily observe the treaty's central limits on nuclear warheads and delivery systems for only 1 more year after its expiry. But only if the United States also shows restraint and does not pursue what he called destabilizing moves.
Unfortunately, the system of Soviet-American and Russian-American agreements on the control of missile, nuclear, and strategic defensive arms has been practically dismantled. I emphasize, Russia is capable of responding to any existing and newly arising threats, responding not in words, but through the application of military technical measures. An example of this was our forced decision to abandon the unilateral moratorium on the deployment of ground-based intermediate and shorter-range missiles.
In his address, Putin laid down clear red lines for Washington. He specifically warned that any U.S. expansion of missile defense, particularly the deployment of interceptors in space, would be viewed as a direct threat to Russia's strategic deterrent. Putin made it clear that if such programs move forward, Moscow's voluntary limits on its nuclear arsenal would immediately be discarded.
Special attention must be given to U.S. plans to expand the strategic components of its missile defense system, including preparations to deploy interceptors in space. Let me be clear, the practical implementation of such destabilizing actions could nullify our efforts to maintain the status quo in the sphere of strategic offensive arms, and Russia will respond accordingly.
The New START Treaty, signed in 2010, remains the only surviving agreement capping U.S. and Russian nuclear forces. Both countries suspended full implementation in 2023, but continue to honor the central limits. With its expiry in 2026, the world faces the collapse of the last safeguard, limiting the planet's 2 largest nuclear arsenals. Putin warned that if Washington abandons these limits entirely, it would unravel not just decades of arms control, but also weaken the global nuclear non-proliferation system.
The START Treaty expires on February 5, 2026, which means the imminent disappearance of the last international agreement providing direct limits on nuclear missile capabilities. A complete rejection of this treaty's legacy would, from many points of view, be a mistaken and short-sighted step. In our opinion, it would also negatively affect the objectives of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, provoking a further race in strategic arms.
Putin's nuclear warning came just hours after fresh tensions flared along NATO's eastern front. Poland reported that multiple Russian drones entered its airspace, sparking military alerts. Romania confirmed that drone debris fell near its border, raising safety concerns. Meanwhile, Estonia accused 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets of violating its skies near Vaindloo Island, an intrusion lasting more than 10 minutes. The incidents have added a dangerous real-world backdrop to Putin's ultimatum, heightening fears of escalation. NATO allies have been quick to react. Poland's Prime Minister vowed that every single violation of NATO airspace will be treated as a direct threat to the alliance's collective security. Estonia has invoked Article 4 of the NATO treaty, demanding emergency consultations. Fighter jets have been scrambled across the region as NATO intensifies air policing missions, while officials in Brussels say these incidents highlight Russia's intent to test the alliance's resolve.
I don't think NATO's holding back. We've sent a Typhoon and a Voyager to support NATO missions in the eastern flank. And of course, we are in close contact with both Poland and Estonia. This is a very serious breach. It's potentially a serious escalation. NATO's eastern flank is taken very, very seriously. I remember being up in Norway discussing these issues in the Arctic, and of course in Poland, in Warsaw, discussing these issues. And Article 4 has been stood up.
Indeed.
And Russia can expect NATO to protect its territory.
The Kremlin, however, has dismissed the NATO reports as deliberate provocations. Russia's defense ministry insists its aircraft and drones were operating in full compliance with international law, claiming that Western governments are inflating the incidents to justify their own military buildups. Moscow accuses NATO of pushing Europe closer to confrontation while ignoring Russia's repeated warnings. For the first time in more than 50 years, there may soon be no treaty limits on nuclear arsenals, even as Moscow and NATO confront each other daily along Europe's borders.